another test of the What's Your Random podcast. Hello, my fellow randoms. Yeah, I'm just going to keep doing random sign-ons. I don't care. I'm just going to come up with characters, voices, situations, scenarios, and go for it. That is right. Hello, my fellow randoms. Welcome to this hour. I didn't write it down. What episode are we on? 25th episode of What's Your Random Podcast. My name is Kev Duffy, and I explore and celebrate independent and individual creativity from the inception of an idea to the process and the practicalities of bringing that idea to life. You have an idea, how do you make it into something tangible or otherwise communicable? I'm just coming up with stuff this time around. But welcome to the podcast. If you haven't done so already, the one thing I asked you to do is to share so that we could get the voice of our guests into the ears of other creatives so that they may inspire and motivate. And I don't know, hopefully people can learn a thing or two from listening to the process and the practicalities of other creatives. And that is what I am here to help achieve. So welcome to the 25th episode of the podcast. We are a quarter of the way to our centennial. Interesting to think. Interesting thought. When will the 100th episode be? Hopefully not too far from now, because the guests keep piling in and I'm having a blast, and I hope you are too. Today's guest is a really fun and interesting guy. He has creative endeavors in music, acting, as well as a comic, which he came on to the podcast to talk with me about today. And his name is Luke Wehner, and he is the conceptualist. He is the writer and the idea generator behind the universe that is developing to support Apocalypse Kinda. And he just had his second issue drop very recently, about a week ago, and go check it out. We talked about that. We talked about his music, which I absolutely love. I have to admit, I woke up one morning, not too long after I recorded my podcast with Luke, and I had a song called Pushing Daisies, or at least that's the chorus line, stuck in my head. It is a really awesome band. I mean, and that's not their only good song. Their whole discography so far is amazing, and I'm hoping to have them on as a collective guest, and it would be interesting to have Luke join again as not just a writer of the comic, but as a member of a group. So something I'm trying to work out, and Luke, if you're listening, come back on the podcast and bring the whole gang, because I think it would be a blast. But today he came on to talk about Apocalypse Kinda and some other ideas he's exploring in the world of comics. And he talked about inspiration, including many from David Bowie. And one of the lessons learned, well, maybe I'll just save that for the post-show debriefing and the episode itself. So I won't spoil my own episode. Go ahead and give a listen to this really fun conversation with Luke Wehner. I hope you enjoy the podcast and enjoy the random. Well, welcome to What's Your Random, Luke Wehner. And Luke is a comic book writer and also a musician. And I was just jamming out to some of your music on Spotify, really? Presuming I found the right group. And
there are a few different ones I learned that have that same band name. Yeah. There's a punk band in Scotland, I think.
Is there? I think I'm on the right one. So your group's name is The Permanent Revolution.
We're The Permanent Revolution. Okay. I think the Scottish punk band is just Permanent Revolution. So
that doesn't sound quite as official now, does it? Nothing against them, but you know.
Hey, I'll take all of that you got, you know.
But yeah, I'm glad I found the right group, because I was reading your comic earlier today, and I think I went to your website and it mentioned that you had a group, and I was like, let me check if they're on Spotify. And then I was able to listen a little bit during lunch, and Man, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it resonated with me and a lot of music I listened to growing up and still listen to today. Like,
Oh, I'm glad.
yeah, kind of a Bouncing Souls kind of vibe. I don't know if you know
I
who
don't
they
know
are.
them. No, who's that? Bouncing
Oh,
Souls?
yeah, Bouncing Souls are a New Jersey punk group
Oh, very
um,
cool.
from I guess, from the 90s and the 2000s. And then
Oh yeah. Oh, very
some
cool.
Some Weezer vibes, some
Weezer, yeah, yeah,
Descendants vibes.
yeah, yeah. No, I would bet. I mean, our bassist is a real big. He's like a total Michigan punk. So I bet that he probably has some point of reference with Bouncing Souls. He's really into
It's
that. I'll have
yeah,
to check them out. Yeah.
yeah, please do. It's kind of funny how even until now, I think the punk scene is so localized. You could grow up in your regional
Yeah.
bubble, right? And
Yeah.
do you consider yourselves of the punk genre or another subgenre
Uh,
or another
that's hard to
rock genre?
say. I mean, I never really, with the band, I never really thought of it in terms of, I think a lot of bands kind of get hyper fixated on, okay, well, what's the genre?
Right.
And if you're trying to put your music on Spotify or wherever you're trying to put it on, the algorithm really wants you to like, they've got this massive list of genres to choose from. I never really thought, I just thought of it as rock and roll, and the great thing about the band is the dudes in it, there's such an eclectic pool of influences. Everybody in the band listens to different shit, which I think was one of the cool things about it. But no, I never punk, I just thought of it as rock and roll.
I like it. Yeah, that's awesome.
You
I
know,
also had like
yeah.
a kind of not all Weezer, but some like Weezer feelings. And
Yeah.
I think the fact that I was stretching in various directions of what it sounded like to me is a testimony to it maybe not fitting into just a genre, kind of as you're alluding to.
Yeah, well, I think that like the best music is like that. It's kind of hard to just peg it into one thing. But thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you checking it out. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
it's been
I'm gonna
hard
be
this year. Yeah,
yeah,
it's been
sorry.
hard this year not really being able to get together with them and jam.
Yeah, how
Yeah.
well, first I want to say welcome to What's Your Random Podcast.
Oh yeah, right.
Luke Wehner. And Luke is here to talk about the writings he's doing for Apocalypse Kinda, a
Mhm.
comic book that you could read the first issue for free on the website. It's very easy to find, apocalypsekinda.com, if I'm not mistaken. Um,
Yeah.
Good. And you also make music and can be found on Spotify by searching The Permanent Revolution. And before we
Check
do,
out the Scottish band though too. Let's hype them up
yeah,
as well. Come on.
check out the
They
Scottish
work
band.
hard.
And was there a third Permanent Revolution group out there too?
There
Like
might be,
a
who
Permanent
knows?
Revolution?
Well, there might be, yeah. I think we should all get together when the pandemic is over and do a group tour.
I
We
like
should.
the Permanent Revolutions, plural.
Yeah,
Round them all up. So before we
yeah.
go into the comic, I'd love to talk about your music a little bit more
I would
since we
love to,
started off
yeah.
there. Yeah. So tell me about your band, and maybe a little bit about yourself in the process and how the band
Sure.
formed and how long you've been together. And, you mentioned that it's been difficult with COVID. Just lay it all on
Yeah,
me. The whole
sure.
story.
Well, I have always loved music and rock and roll, but I had never been involved in it really in any way until the band started, which I think was 2017 or 2018. It was always something that I wanted to do. My dad plays guitar, my brother plays guitar, but I really don't know. Thinking back on my childhood, I'm not really sure what it was. I think I would think that I would have, yeah, give me that. I want to learn how to do it. But I just as a kid, I don't think I didn't have the discipline really to pick up a guitar and learn how to do it. Especially back in the day. I mean, this was in like I guess my brother would have learned to play guitar in the 90s or the early 2000s. So this is kind of like just at the beginning of the internet. It's not like today where you can go on YouTube and there's just countless accounts of people teaching you how to do it. You had to have the book. Do you play any instruments?
When I was a kid growing up, I played guitar and I had the book
Yeah. So you know the book
and
I'm
some
talking about.
lessons in person.
Well, yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, my brother didn't do the lessons, and I guess my parents are divorced, so I don't really have very many memories of my dad sitting down with him, teaching him how to play. I remember my brother had the book. Now, the book, if because you've seen it, it's like a phone book. You open that up, it's so boring to look at. It doesn't
Right.
really inspire, you know but I've always loved music, and especially, like David Bowie and Iggy Pop. I loved that stuff, but I didn't know how to play anything. So it was always a private sort of, you know what I mean? It was just kind of
Just
the
enjoying
passion yeah,
on
it
your
was sort
own.
of the passion that narrowly got away. I would just kind of think, in another timeline, maybe I would have learned how to play guitar and this would have been something that I did. But I don't really know what it was around like 2016 or 2017. I just started songwriting. And now, granted, I only just this year got a guitar and I'm teaching myself how to play guitar. I don't want to go too in the weeds on this, but
Go as deep as you want. Yeah, that's what we're here for.
there's a website called Jam Studio. And now Jam Studio is a program that you can use to make fully arranged demos of songs. So they've got all the chords, you can set the tempo, you can plug in your chord progression, and then you can play it back and you can add in, they've got just guitar loops, drum loops, whatever. I just started using that. I just started playing around with that in like 2015 or 2016, writing songs with that just for fun, but it became an obsession. I started to feel that I had a real capacity for it. It was really exciting, to find something to really, for the first time, think this thing that I've loved for so long, that I've always kind of imagined doing. Here I am. I'm really encouraged by the results that I'm getting. So I think by the end of like 2016, I had like 10 or 12 songs that I had written just using this thing, Jam Studio, and I thought they were pretty cool. So I just reached out to some people who I know who are musicians, and I just asked them, listen, do you want to get together and I've just written some of these songs. Do you want to jam? Do you want to jam on some of these songs? So that's how the band started. Most of the people, I mean, I was mostly acting prior to the band. So most of the guys who were in the band I knew through acting. They're also actors. The guitarist is the only one who isn't an actor. But we just started together and we just started jamming, and it really became something cool. I mean, at the beginning there, it really was like, hey, you guys, I've written these songs. Do you want to get together and play my songs? But really quickly, it became much more of a band. Everybody else had songs that they had written. We started writing songs together. Pretty much everybody in the band sings, so it really went from just something small and private that I was kind of doing in my bedroom, late at night on this little jam studio thing, making these tiny little songs. It became something a lot bigger and a lot cooler. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would not have if you didn't take, obviously a few steps, but it's a big step
Yeah.
to bring your creative work to a group and say, hey guys, you want to like try to see
For
if what I did
sure.
is something worth doing?
Yeah. Well, it's frightening enough if you're actually a musician. You know how to play guitar, you know how to play, but if you're just some dude who's like, I remember kind of explaining at the beginning to these guys, they're great musicians, and I'm not, I'm not a musician in that sense. And I'm like showing them this website, like, yes, you put in the chords and then you can set the, you know what I mean? I was like a monkey at a typewriter. But they were very encouraging. I mean, they've always been really encouraging, and I'm really proud of the work that we, have done together, and it was a really neat thing. I miss it a lot. Yeah, I hope that we're able to get back together soon.
Yeah. So have you guys played at any live shows, or pretty much, I
Oh
mean, the
yeah.
recording quality and everything is great. So
Well, thank you. Yeah.
what were the
No,
steps after you guys started, playing together and
I
jamming and realizing that it's a thing?
yeah, I feel like we played out pretty soon after we started rehearsing. I mean, these guys, they're great musicians. They're really fantastic. So we got the material up pretty quickly. I think that we maybe rehearsed like once a week, maybe for, I don't know, like 2 months or something. And then we just played at some dive bar in Brooklyn. And I mean, for a few years there, yeah, we were playing like once a month just at any dive bar that would have us. And it was really fun. We were constantly writing, pretty much every show we were debuting new stuff. It was really a lot of fun, particularly, because I moved to New York to be an actor, which is really is hard because you're really fighting for opportunities to do what you like to do. You're fighting to be cast in things, you're fighting to get an opportunity to even just audition for stuff, you know. But the band, it really was like every week we would get together and people would be bringing in stuff that they had been working on. It was really like putting yourself out there every week in a way that was really gratifying. But yeah, we
Yeah.
played out all the time in the shows. I mean, we had what, because we're mostly actors. I mean, we had fake blood, we had all kinds of nonsense, taking our clothes off. You would go
So
you would go to
you
places.
made it theatric.
Oh yeah, no, it was very theatrical. We would, you know, we would go to these dive bars, and God bless these just shitty dive bars with the bad sound, and the dad rock bands. Those bands that are
Yeah.
like three or four dads playing like the blues or whatever. So we would show up at these places, and number one, we're like a big band. Like we've got 5 people in our band, which I learned that's a lot for some of these small places. On
Right.
top of that, like the dudes in the band, our keyboardist he's like 6'5". He's a massive guy. you know, it's like we took up a lot of space. We were really loud. We were really all over the place. Fake blood. We used to do this thing where, so what I would do is I would take eggs, I would poke a hole in the bottom of the egg,
Okay.
and then one on top with a pin. So what you do is you put one end of the egg and you just go, and the yolk comes out. Collect the yolk in a bowl. Then you put fake blood in the egg. So during the show, we've got all these eggs filled with fake blood. And during the song, you smash them on yourself. It's really shocking to see. But you show up, to the whatever dive bar it is in Midtown with your eggs. And the doorman is like, what's going on there? What are you doing with that? And I'm, it's for the show. Don't worry, I won't get it on the carpet. No, we really like, that was the kind of thing that we were, I mean, that's part of the fun of it. You know what I mean? That was the kind of stuff that I loved. I mean, the bands that I love, like David Bowie, Iggy Pop, anything like that, that was really an event.
Yeah, yeah. Did that scratch at all the itch that you are wanting to scratch with your acting career?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I never really thought of it as separate from acting. I mean, the musicians who I like has that quality to it. I mean, it's all
Performative and
storytelling.
right.
Yeah, but it's all storytelling, whether it's acting or whether it's music or whether it's writing, it's all the same thing. I mean, there's not really a there's not really a difference between getting up in a dive bar and performing rock and roll versus, getting up and doing Shakespeare. It's really the same. You're using the same muscles, the same part of yourself. What was so freeing about it is that, when you're acting like something like Shakespeare or like Anton Chekhov, these great plays, these are the great plays. You don't want to do a bad job. You don't want to do this badly because the play is great. So you don't want to suck. Well, the songs, the rock and roll, we wrote this shit. So, you can't tell us that we're doing it wrong. That was what was so free. That
That's
was really what
interesting.
was
Yeah.
so liberating about it. It belonged to you. You made it, so you can get up there. And if people don't like it, well, it's just sort of too bad. Hopefully people like it. But that was really liberating for me. It was really the experience of being in the band and really taking that kind of ownership over making something and getting up and doing it for people and really feeling like this is ours. It really gave me the confidence that led me to doing something like Apocalypse Kinda. And I
Oh,
think made me
awesome.
a better actor too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you a actor for film and screen or
Sure, yeah.
primarily
I
stage or
mean,
both?
I
What?
would act wherever I could. I mean, mostly like in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from, there's a lot of theater.
Okay.
So mostly theater, but some film and stuff like that. I mean, I would act wherever I could. I wasn't wasn't picky.
Yeah. And did you act like as you were growing up over the course of your childhood, or did you have other creative
Oh,
outlets when you were younger?
yeah. Well, I think I started acting maybe when I was like 11 or 12, just doing youth theater productions, like did like Oliver and I did Peter Pan or whatever the hell else you could do. But no, as a kid, I always loved music, movies, TV. I always loved that kind of stuff. I always imagined, the movies that I loved, I was the kind of kid, most actors are like this, but I would act the stuff out in my bedroom. You know what I mean? I was the kind of kid where I loved to, when I was home alone, I love to go into the bathroom and look at the mirror and try to act out like, this sounds crazy, but try to act out like getting stabbed. In movies when a sounds silly, but in a movie
No,
when
it's
a
awesome.
character gets stabbed unexpectedly, yeah, and so I would go in front of the exactly. You see, you could be an actor. I would go in front of the mirror and I would just try to like, you know. But I any kind of stuff like that. I had a tape recorder. I used to play around like recording into the tape recorder. Like one of my favorite things to do when I was little was go into the backyard with the tape recorder and I would turn it on and I would pretend that I was like a wildlife expeditionist. Like here we are, in the jungles of Africa. And then I would pretend that like gorillas would attack us. So I would throw the recorder around, roll around on the ground, and then I would be laying there like, oh, the gorillas have just left us and I don't think we're going to make it. I mean, that was just the kind of kid that I was. So it was always a part of me when I was little. I loved storytelling. I loved movies, it was always what I wanted to be a part of, was just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's awesome that there's various iterations of that, over the course of your career and up until Apocalypse Kinda. So what you mentioned that going up on stage to perform music was something that allowed you to have more confidence to do things like the comic.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that and like why it took finding more confidence to pursue a story like Apocalypse Kinda.
Well, I had been interested in writing for a long time, but I never really found the avenue really for it, Just for my own amusement, I would write things. I would write short films, you know. When I was in high school, we had like the AV department, and me and some friends, we wrote a couple of episodes of almost like a Pee-wee's Playhouse type TV show, like a mystery science theater thing that we tried to get, our AV club to do. Like I was always trying to find some outlet for that. I had been interested in writing for a long time, but I never really could find something that would connect. You write a short film, it's kind of hard then to go and get it made. It takes a
Right.
lot of time and it takes a lot of money. Um, and a few years ago, like maybe in 2019, I just started reading comics more seriously than I had in the past. I live here in New York, so I would go into, we've got like Midtown Comics is the big
Hmm.
comic shop in Midtown. And I just started going in there and reading them. And I didn't really have a background with comics. It wasn't really something that I was into as a kid, but I started discovering it a few years ago. Just liked them a lot. And just got interested in the idea of writing one. And I had this idea for a while, this sort of the seed of apocalypse kinda in my mind, but I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I wasn't really sure what this idea could be. It was just something that I sort of daydreamed about, you know? But the more that I was reading comics, the more I started to think, maybe this could be a comic. And I just couldn't shake that feeling. It sort of set me down the path of figuring out, like, well, okay, so if I were to write a comic, how would I do that? And once it was written, how then would I find somebody to draw it? And then what? So it was really just a little by little process. There wasn't really a eureka moment where I thought, I've got to write a comic. It was just little by little, not being able to shake this feeling is kind of how it came together.
And how long was that process from inception of the idea to having a issue out in the world?
Sure. I would say that I started writing it maybe in late 2018, very early 2019, and started getting serious about finding somebody to draw it the summer of 2019. So the first issue came out this past summer, like June or July. So it was a long process from it just being something private that I was just sort of working on my own to then, reaching out to collaborators to help bring it to life.
Right. And having written for comics, I mean, everybody could write in their own way, but did you follow any um, of the typical comic script formats, or did you write in more of a film format or your own
Yeah.
format?
Well,
Or
I think a lot of people, I'm realizing when they first start writing comics, write like a film script. And that was what I did. I did that because you don't know what you don't know. I didn't really know how a script for a comic was formatted. I'd never seen, a comic script before. So I was writing it like that, just as a film. And I pretty quickly realized, okay, well this isn't going to go. Like you've got to do it panel by panel. And I have an acquaintance back home in Cleveland who is a comic artist and a comic writer who I had reached out to just to pick his brain. I think I just sent him an email like, I'm thinking about doing this. This is really new to me. Do you have any advice about how to move forward? And one of the questions that I had is there anywhere that I can go, anywhere online that you know of, where I can just read comic scripts? Because I
Mhm.
wanted to know, how do they break it down?
Right.
How much detail do they provide? Stuff like that. So he linked me to somewhere. I can't remember now where it was, but it was just a huge database, all these comics. And at this time, I had started to read comics more seriously, but comics were still very new to me. So there were a lot of comics on there that to the average, comic fan, really big stuff that everybody would have read that I had never heard of before. So I'm encountering it for the first time, not as the finished product, but just, as the script. So I kind of underwent this education for myself, just reading the scripts, trying to compare script to finished product, really
Mm,
trying to understand, because it's very different, not just in terms of how something is formatted,
right.
but in terms of how things are really distilled and broken down, writing for film versus writing for comics. And so I really did have to kind of try to acclimate myself to what was required.
And do you have were there any favorites that you remember now in terms of like favorite comic scripts or
Sure.
favorite in
I
terms
mean,
of the comparison between the script and the finished
yeah.
product?
I mean, at the beginning, I really just liked a lot of Neil Gaiman stuff that I read. I mean, I like Neil Gaiman generally, you know? So the Neil Gaiman stuff I really loved. The first comic that I was buying month to month that was really inspiring to me is this thing from Scotty Young called Middle West. Do you know that?
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, Middle West is this fantasy series, but set instead of like in Middle Earth, it's kind of set in a I don't use this term like in a negative sense, but like kind of a cliche Midwestern setting, middle America,
Uh-huh.
but with fantasy elements. So if you can imagine like Missouri, but with wizards, you know? And it's great. It was really wonderful. But I was reading that. That was really inspiring. All kinds of stuff, though.
Yeah. And then like so you had written for film before and obviously you wrote your music. Is there any
Yeah.
similarity or anything you bring from one of the other disciplines into comic writing when you write for comics
Sure.
that you think crosses over?
I think that I was watching an interview a couple of days ago. Do you remember that old sitcom, The Munsters?
Yes.
Okay. So I was watching this interview with the dude who played Grandpa on The Munsters. I don't even know how I got onto this, but it was this interview. It's just I went down a YouTube rabbit hole
Rabbit
as
hole.
people
Yeah.
are often want to do, and I ended up on this interview with the dude who played Grandpa on The Munsters. But he was giving some advice. They asked him, "Do you have any advice for young actors, for young artists?" And he said, "The one piece of advice that I would give is find something that you love to do and learn to love the way that you do it." And for me, songwriting, that was really what it was about. I mean, these were things that I was coming up with. They were ideas that were coming out of my head and my heart. It was not just, acting, when you are acting a role, that's really personal because you're using your own experiences, your own past, your memories, your feelings, but it's somebody else's words, which can make you feel safe in a way because at the end of the day, I didn't write this. I'm
Mm.
bringing myself to these words, but this isn't me. I didn't write it. Songwriting or just writing for a comic or book or whatever, these are your ideas, your feelings. You're really putting yourself out there in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be if you're interpreting somebody else's stuff. Songwriting for me, really, the big lesson was, just be unapologetic about what you feel, what you think. You know what I mean? Just put it out there.
Yeah.
Let other people make of it what they're going to make of it. And I think that with the comic as well, that's sort of, you have to start with that. I think you want to then be able to do that stuff that's not so fun to do. You want to be able to ask yourself, yeah, but is this any good? How does this need to be edited? Is this coming across? Those are important questions to ask yourself, but you have to start with a conviction that what you think and what you feel is worth getting out there. So
Right.
go before you're ready, put it out there, worry about the editing later. But that was really the main lesson that I learned from the band that I was then able to carry over, hopefully, into writing for the comic.
That's awesome. And is that illustration of the confidence that you were talking about developing through doing the band and writing and live performances? And what
I
was it a
think so. I
specific?
mean,
Yeah, was it a specific like feeling? Now I'm ready to do the comic. Was that an epiphany?
well, I did really feel after I had been doing the band for a while, I really did feel that newfound sense of confidence, and I was noticing also that the other guys in the band, it was one thing for me to be coming up with songs, bringing them in, and for these guys who I really thought of as being serious, real deal musicians, for them to not think that the stuff I was coming up with sucked, that they liked it, that they thought it had value, but also that the band seemed to be for them as well a vehicle where they were kind of discovering themselves as songwriters. Do you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
nobody in the band had really, I think with maybe the exception of the keyboardist I know had been in a band before, but the guitarist was a solo musician. Don't think the drummer had been in a band. Don't think the bassist had been in a band. We were really all kind of discovering ourselves, or at least in a deeper way, discovering ourselves as songwriters, and that was inspiring. So absolutely, it was something that I have carried forward with me since then. Yeah, I wouldn't have had the confidence, I don't think, to do the comic if I hadn't done the band.
That's awesome, and it's kind of illustrates, I think, the power of collaboration as well, not just the finished product and what you're producing together, but also
Yeah,
the fact that you have some eyeballs on what's coming out of your head, and
absolutely. Yeah, with people
you
you
could develop
trust.
confidence by virtue of somebody just giving what you have to say a listen, and also the
Absolutely.
regularity. You have some commitment to the folks who you're performing with and playing with, and you set a regular schedule of going out to bars every weekend or every other weekend. And with, I think, that practice comes some confidence and comfort in doing the performance and comfort in what you have to say and saying it. I find the same thing with the podcast as well. If I have a lull for a week or two and I don't have too many interviews, and then I jump back into it, I might feel not quite as fresh or be a little bit worried. But if I have the podcasts coming in more regularly and having conversations more consistently, then it's just like, oh, hey, I got another one today.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think that, I'm curious when I think about people like, say, somebody who is, I don't know, a painter, or if you're a writer, but you write in a medium that isn't really collaborative, like I have a friend who's a poet, or a friend who, you like a writer, but you write short stories. So you may be sharing your work with people, but at the end of the day, it's just your work. You have the ultimate responsibility for the work that you do, versus everything that I've ever been mixed up in, acting, music, writing for comics. It's all very collaborative, where you have other
Mm.
people who are coming in and adding in their own juice to whatever it is you're doing, which for me is just, that's like the lifeblood of my life. I love that. I would love coming up with a song, either not having the song done. Maybe I've only got like a verse and a chorus, but I don't have anything else. Or I might show up and think, yeah, I've got this song totally done. Verse, chorus, bridge, it's all there. And then you bring it into the rehearsal room, and they either take something that you had that was unfinished, and they take it somewhere you never, like, I never would have thought that it could be that. Or even better, they take something that you think is finished and they crack it open and they take that somewhere that you never thought it could have gone. Like that to me is just what life is all about, how fun that is and how exciting that is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, two minds are better than one kind of approach to
Yeah.
creativity. Even if it's to finish the last percent or help you edit something, it's always helpful to get, for me as a creator as well, to get another perspective on what I'm doing. Because
Yeah.
the more perspectives you have weighing in and helping you make informed decisions about your creative process and the finished product, the more that will resonate to hopefully a wider audience or help you target the audience that that is your intended audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remind me though, so before you did the podcast, what were you doing? What's your background in?
So I'm a sales guy by day,
Yeah.
and
Well, that's
um,
an art in and of itself. That's an art too.
I'm a relationship manager, you could call it,
Yeah.
by day, and I do the podcast by night. But I also am working on a YouTube web series right now,
Yeah.
and
So
I
you're a
did
writer.
a
Yeah.
I did a film about 10 years ago, a guerrilla indie film. I actually filmed quite a bit
Yeah.
in Brooklyn. I'm from New York, the suburbs of New York, and we
Oh,
filmed in the
cool.
city quite a bit. Yeah. So filmmaking and writing and story building are
Yeah.
my
Well, then you
areas of
absolutely know.
interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
collaborative. And especially when you're making a movie in that guerrilla way, where you're not even sure that the cops aren't going to be called on you. You're really, you're really
Yeah,
depending on each
absolutely.
other and collaborating.
Absolutely. And relying on essentially strangers, actors, of
Yeah.
course, very professional and very amazing actors, but
Yeah.
people who at the end of the day you don't know, and you're not super it's not a super professional atmosphere when you're filming that
Absolutely.
way. And
I, yeah.
if people are late, you could be screwed. Um, yeah, on a budget, no pay, maybe
Yeah. That's the
minimal
great
pay.
thing. Yeah, it's like, well, it's like at the circus where you're on the high wire and hopefully you have a net, except you are at the same time all up together on the high wire and also the net. You're both. What it's like when you're doing that kind of stuff. Yeah.
It really was. And I think that was my first foray in more collaborative um, creative processes. So I wrote this story on my own and I had some input in editing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, filming it was like, wow, okay, yeah, I need to take this into account, that when you're working with a group of 5 to 10 people, there's things are going to change, and you are going to find some gems in what other people bring to what you're trying to achieve. And what you
Absolutely.
imagined is just going to be enhanced by
Yeah.
your collaborators.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So for Apocalypse Kinda, what was the process like for you in writing it? If you could get a little bit more granular, I mean, after
Sure.
you learned about the format a little bit more, um, what was the inspiration for the story, and what
Yeah.
was the process like to write it? Was it fluid and organic, or did you set up a little bit more of a regiment for yourself to make sure you
Yeah.
finished on a certain schedule?
Um, I, it is hard to point to a single moment where, like, we did another interview a couple of weeks ago where this came up, but do you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the movie?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen it, but it's yeah, I know
Oh,
it.
well, you should see it. It's
I
good.
should.
It's good. It was on Netflix for a while. I think they took it off. Anyway, so there's a story about how the guy, Toby Hooper, who wrote and directed it, how he got the idea for it. So he was in a hardware store and it was really crowded. Okay. And he's thinking to himself, oh man, how am I gonna get out of here? It was like Black Friday at Home Depot or whatever. And he sees on the wall all the chainsaws. And he thinks to himself, now that would be a way to get through the crowd. And in that moment, bing, he got the idea for this movie, Texas Chainsaw. There wasn't really a similar thing with Apocalypse, kind of. It wasn't like I was just riding along one day and I thought, oh, I've got this great idea. It was really just a confluence of a lot of stuff that I had been thinking about. I had really wanted to, and with the band also, this is kind of where my writing was tending, just working out for myself a lot of things that I was chewing on about politics. And there were kind of political questions that I had. There were things that I was thinking a lot about, that I was obsessing about, that I really wanted to be writing about. And with the band, I just sort of wasn't quite getting at what I wanted to be getting at. When you're in a band, you can work really hard on the lyrics. You can work really hard on trying to get something across in a song. And then you show up at the bar and the sound system sucks. Nobody knows what the hell you're singing. Nobody hears what you're saying. And I was just kind of, for myself, I was just hitting a bit of a wall. There was more that I wanted to explore for myself that I wasn't really able to get at. And that's kind of where the comic came out of. I really wanted to write something around those ideas.
Interesting. And then, I mean, besides just those ideas, are there other things? How close to your person and personal thoughts and personal experience is the finished product and the story that you wrote
Sure.
in that case?
Well, I mean, the comic, it's shaping up to be, I mean, from the beginning, yeah, it's very personal to me. I mean, the questions that I am kind of approaching in it are personal to me. I really wanted to write something about, how to put this. I'm really interested in politics, but I'm particularly interested in other people's politics. Where do our ideas about politics, where does that come from? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
all get our ideas from somewhere. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I wanted to write something about that, about how, everybody can tell, no matter what your political persuasion is, whether you're just thinking of it in a binary kind of right left way, or, within that, binary, there's a lot of different little things, whether you're
Right.
this or you're that or you're this.
Or a Venn diagram or
Sure,
however
yeah.
you want to split it.
The one thing that everybody agrees on is that things aren't going well. We have very serious problems.
Right.
Everybody can agree on that. Things are going badly and they're only going to get worse. But there's not a lot of agreement about why and in what way. Everybody knows that there's a problem, but everybody's diagnosis, the solution that everybody advances, those are all different,
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in where those ideas come from, is something that I wanted to write about. And I thought that there was a lot of, certainly in the last couple of years, a lot of political art,
Mm-hmm.
certainly more political art than there had been since maybe the time of, like, I don't know, the war in Iraq or whatever. There was a lot of, after Donald Trump got elected, there was a lot more political art. But I kind of felt like there wasn't a lot of it that was kind of getting at what I was noticing. Do you know what I mean?
I think I relate a
Yeah.
lot to what you're after, and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe almost, yeah, trying to understand the differences a little bit more than just point them out. And
Yeah.
one thing that I've thought about recently, and I think I read Apocalypse Kinda, and I really enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it. And one of the main notes I took was that it feels very introspective in a way
Yeah.
that the character is interacting with other people in his community, but nobody seems to understand him. And maybe he is also having trouble understanding himself. Um,
Sure.
and yeah, I really related to that. And now that you're talking about kind of trying to understand where people get their political ideas from and this sort of thing, one idea that I had
Yeah.
recently is, like you said, where we agree that things aren't going so well. And presumably we all want them to get better. We want the situation to
Mm-hmm.
improve. But I've never
Yeah.
heard like exactly what our end goal would be. So, I mean, this is not totally directly related to what you're talking about, but just, and we don't have to get into
Yeah.
like a specific political discussion or anything, but it's in more general conceptual thinking. That's something that came up in my mind recently that I think is not often addressed, similar to the way that, you know, what you're getting at is not often
Yeah.
addressed, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically where do our political ideas come from and why do they differ so much? Kind of
Yeah.
understanding the foundational belief systems of people, or
Sure.
where, yeah, like the origination of these differences, as opposed to
Yeah.
just acknowledging the difference.
Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, I think I understand what you're getting at. I think that in politics, something that I've been learning for myself the last couple of years is probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is clarity. Okay. So clarity of ideas. And there's not a lot of clarity in politics in our
Mm,
country. There's a lot of obfuscation and mystification, and there's a lot of saying one thing and doing another, and there's a lot of, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
that, it's just, you see that throughout history, though. I mean, it's convenient to say one thing and do another. It's convenient to say one thing and then do another and then act like you did. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Smoke
So
and mirrors.
yeah, I mean, there's just, that's all over the place. There's a lot of that. Yeah.
So, do you want to? I mean, I felt the comic was quite introspective. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what vehicles and how you utilize the characters in a more personal story, how you explore these huge concepts, ideas, problems.
Yeah. Well, I thought that because I was trying to write something about, really about politics in America, okay? It doesn't technically take place in America. It takes place in a country very much like America. It doesn't really matter. It's enough like America. Um, so I wanted to have all different kinds of people. I wanted to represent as many different viewpoints as, you know what I mean? Because that's what politics in America is made up of, all these different viewpoints. Um, And it was important to me that the main character, this little boy, Toby, be somebody who doesn't have many firm ideological commitments, because he was going to be surrounded by characters who had much firmer ideological commitments. So this main character is sort of, I guess, kind of a 4chan kid. Do you know, somebody who is jaded and who doesn't really, is sort of checked out, you know what I mean? Who kind of writes it all off as culture war, you know?
Right.
Somebody who can't quite make sense or parse a lot of what's going on around him, so you sort of check out, you know what I mean?
Maybe he's apathetic and or, I mean,
Certainly,
there's
yeah.
points in the story where he has his own life going on and he's worried about what matters to him most, trying to not spoil the story or get into it too deep, but you know,
no, I mean, you can
yeah, I mean, he's really introspective, I think, and it seems like people, as much as he doesn't understand the people around and the groups around him, they don't seem to understand him.
For sure. And really, I mean, what the story as it goes on is about, hopefully, what comes across, what we're able to do, is it's a story about people realizing that things are not the way that they appear to be. Okay? Things are not the way that they appear to be. Things look one way, but underneath, you know, it's a whole other story. And so it was important, I thought, to have a character who at the beginning is almost just has no commitments in that way, is really only committed to none of this matters. None of this affects me. It doesn't matter. All these people over here and over there, they're all idiots. They all care about this shit. It doesn't make a difference. You know, I'm checked out. And that then this is and we learn as the story goes on, we learn some of how this kid came to be that way. We learn about some of the things that happened in his past that hardened him. But at the beginning of the story, this is a checked out kind of kid surrounded by characters over here and over there who are a lot more engaged and have much firmer ideological commitments than he does. But this little kid then kind of gets set down a path where he starts to learn more of what's really going on.
And kind of see past the veneer, so to speak.
Well, sure, yeah. And as the story goes on, I mean, some of the other characters will then too start to, you know, kind of realize like, oh.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some mystical elements at play as well, which
absolutely
makes, I think, there's a variety of layers, which the more layers there are, the more you could peel back to find different.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's fun. I mean, like, I wanted to do something political, but I wanted it to be fun too. I think that if something is fun, it's a lot easier to then get political versus if something is political to start, then trying to from there have fun. Do you know what I mean? Can be a little difficult.
Absolutely.
So it has, it has magical elements. It has this, that, and the other, but hopefully all grounded in a kind of in a story that deals with some of these political questions. Because I just think that's, for me, the last couple of years, that's been the important thing. And I won't go too much into the weeds about it, but I do think that, we live in a place where there's a status quo that does not work. That's putting it in a very vague, general, non-committal kind of way.
I think most everybody could agree to that.
Yeah,
right?
that's like Star Wars. Like anybody can project their politics onto that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm somebody who's on the left, so that means it means something different to me than it might mean to something else. But we live in a place like it doesn't work. It's a status quo that doesn't work. That hurts people. It is bad for people. But the status quo is very strong. It's very strong. You know what I mean? And it has a way of making people think that they're fighting against it when really at the same time they're re-legitimizing it and they're making it stronger.
Kind of
Do you know what I
perpetuating
mean?
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's
There's
a interesting foundation, an interesting topic to explore through these characters and these groups of characters in a pretty intimate, I think, comic. There, it's not overflowing with characters in the scene, and I really
yeah,
like that about it. That you're able to differentiate. There's a group of Boy Scout boys that pops in and out here and there. There's
yeah.
there's two female characters that pop in and out. There's the father. It's not overflowing with characters and settings, and it gives you the ability to focus, I think, on what's happening to Toby at any given time, which
Well, I'm
it
glad
has
to
a
hear you
cool
say
focal
that.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was worried at the beginning that it had way too had way too much. Yeah,
I
so
don't
I'm
think you need to
glad.
worry about that. No.
Okay.
So
Well, I'm glad.
how much have you written? Where do you see it going? Is there a end point that you have already established? And I mean, have you written to that end point?
Yeah. When we first started putting it together, I had written maybe 6 or 7 issues right at the beginning there. And then when Enrico Orlandi, who's the artist, when I started working with him on issue 1, it then became much more a question of how do we just take this first issue, forget all this other stuff that you've written? How do you just focus on this and make it as strong as it can be? And once we started doing that, the first issue started changing a lot. It kind of became an open question then about what's going to happen next. So a lot of it has been written, but as we go issue to issue, we just finished the second issue now. So much changes when you really start getting into the weeds about, okay, now let's really work on this issue. And as you go, the roadmap that I had set out, it really has changed quite a bit. So at this point, we're sort of thinking as these first 4 issues as the first arc of it. So we know how those end. We know how the first 4 issues go. It may change a little bit between now and when the 4th one comes out, but probably not a lot. After that, it's fairly wide open. I think that if you're trying to write a comic, regardless if you have a lot of experience doing it or whether you're new to it, a good piece of advice is to try to keep it simple because it takes a lot of time. It's expensive to do. It's difficult enough to do 1 issue of something, let alone 4 or 5. So try to tell your story in a compact way, But when I first started writing this, I was so new to comics that I didn't really have those inhibitions. And inhibition might not be the right word because inhibition we usually think of like something you want to let go of or a bad thing. Like I think it's good to edit yourself and keep it manageable.
Right. Yeah,
It's helpful.
That's one thing that comes up in conversation with a lot of people I speak with is, use the guardrails and use the barrier to
Yeah,
your benefit. It doesn't have to be a limitation as it could be used as a sandbox, so to speak.
absolutely.
You could play in
Absolutely.
the sandbox, stay in the sandbox. If you spend time out of the sandbox, you're kind of maybe wasting your time. You're getting too big. You're getting too
Yeah,
grandiose, and you're gonna detract and dilute the sand with dirt.
absolutely.
Something
Yeah,
like
I think
that.
that short and punchy is usually better than just flabby and overly long. But when I was first writing this, I was really writing it in an uninhibited kind of way. And there's this David Cronenberg. I like the filmmaker. You're filmmakers, David Cronenberg, who did, yeah.
I'm terrible with names.
Well, he's the guy who did, I mean, if you remember, like Eastern Promises and like Videodrome, you
Oh,
know,
okay.
but he's like one of my favorite filmmakers. But he gave an interview once where he was talking about how, it's hard work to make a movie. It takes a lot out of you. So if I make a movie, I want to put a lot of stuff into it. I want to put a lot of ideas into it. When I first started writing this comic, I was thinking about all this stuff. There were all these questions I was working through in my mind. So I was really trying to cram as much of it as I could into this thing, and I was thinking, oh, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that. So I want to have an analog for this and I want to have a parallel for that. Big, huge, expansive thing, and so now it really is a process as we're really actually putting them together, trying to edit and figure out what can we lose, what can we keep, what can be brought into sharper focus. But we're working in a kind of undisciplined way in the sense that it isn't really marked out, A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, and this is how the story ends. I don't know how the story ends. I don't know where it's going to go. I know enough to keep writing,
Yeah, yeah.
but I don't really know how it's going to end. I have some suspicions, but I'm just sort of in that place of discovery about it, which is a fun place to
That's a
be.
fun
It's kind of
place to
fun.
play. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you recognize it from when you're like writing scripts for movies. Like I have a cousin who's a writer who's written some films, and he always says, I can't start writing a movie until I know how it ends,
Hmm.
which makes a certain amount of sense. But for me, I don't know. I don't really work that way. That wasn't the way I worked when I would write songs. I would never know what the song was going to be about, you know. I
Right.
would sometimes just have a single line in my head. I would just think to myself, that's a great lyric right
And you don't
there.
know if it's the chorus or the middle or the end
You
or
don't
where it's
know.
placed, but it's an
Yeah.
inspiration to build upon.
And sometimes you don't even know what it means. It might be a
Right.
very abstract lyric. It just gives you a feeling. And then you just build from there. That was really how Apocalypse kind of got started. I just knew what I was thinking about all the time. I knew how I was spending my days, what I was obsessing over. I had a feeling that I wanted to write about it. And all this stuff grew up around it.
Yeah, yeah. I was working on building a costume recently, and so I wasn't writing
Yeah.
as much. And whenever I sat down to write, just because I had my fingers in too many pies, I felt overwhelmed and couldn't really get the spirit inspired. But now
Yeah.
that the costume's done, I sat down to write, and then like all of these kind of seemingly unrelated ideas started to kind of revolve around one another until they formed and gelled together into something that I could use. And yeah, I wasn't able to do that until now, and
Yeah.
it's really liberating to sit down and have the ideas come together, and it's something definitely magical about it. And when I
Absolutely.
wrote my film, I had a similar experience that it seems you had in writing the comic, that I just wrote a ton of ideas that I thought was a story, but really it was just like telling too much on the periphery of a story that was in this at the heart of it. And that
Yeah.
was hard for me to pull the story out of the center of this kind of blob of words. I don't know if
Yeah.
what I'm saying now is making too much sense,
No, I think
but
I
it
do.
it seems like you wrote a very elaborate story, maybe, and then from that you are pulling out the things that make sequential sense, things that can really form into one theme and one cohesive story. And I'm wondering, is that accurate?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
that, I mean, similar to what you say, I think you have to be able to let yourself just go, just free associate, let accidents happen, see what comes out of you. And then you can then see, once you look at all the Legos that have spilled out onto the table, you then start noticing patterns or
Mm.
similar
Hmm.
things, or you can rearrange ideas and this makes sense. And oh, look, there was a synchronicity here and there. But yeah, what were you saying?
No, no, I love that, and I love the idea of that synchronicity because
Yeah.
in writing just yesterday, I had a kind of a idea that I wanted to play with towards the end of the story, let's say, and I realized that it could be just as, if not more, impactfully used in the middle of the story. And just the idea
Yeah.
of realizing that synchronicity and not being tied to your first idea, and not even just idea, but placement and order of events and things of that. I think when you're looser and approach storytelling with a little bit more flexibility, in the end, you're going to come up with something that's more seamless and more, you know, to have the flexibility to move things around like that is sometimes hard. And
Oh,
if you
yeah.
allow yourself that flexibility, you're going to have a more fleshed out and comprehensive piece in the end. And what I was asking was, you know, that's not really the easiest thing. And I think it takes practice. And I wonder if, in your experience, if it was at all hard to make the decisions to lose some things and to focus on others.
Yeah. Well, I think that the hardest part was, yeah, it is difficult. I
How
mean,
do you
it's
how do you
difficult.
and I guess the as you answer that question, how do you
Mhm.
manage that difficulty? It's essentially like killing your darlings, or whatever the phrase is,
Yeah.
that you just got to slay some of the things that you loved in a story or creative work to better the whole. And
Yeah.
you know, as you're going through your creative process, how do you manage that?
Here, I'm going to ask you, is it all right if I just grab my charger really quickly?
Yeah, absolutely,
Because
go
I
for it.
notice now, all right, I know that this is really uncouth in a podcast interview.
That's okay. I'll
This is
chop it
really,
out.
no, keep it in. The people need to know. Hold on just one second. Now return to your regularly scheduled podcast interview. Um, okay, so the question was like, how do you manage
Yeah, how do you
letting
manage?
go of shit?
Yeah, letting go of stuff, killing your darlings. You know.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think now what there was that I really didn't want to let go, that I had to let go of. I think that one of the good things about writing a comic that you conceive of as being ongoing versus, say, writing a movie or writing a play where you've got 90 minutes and that's it,
Right.
unless they greenlight a sequel, is that anything that you come up with that you really like, well, maybe it can just happen a little bit later in the story. So that's kind of the way that I operate. I mean, I like, for me, my big artistic inspiration in everything that I do is David Bowie. This is somebody whose life I just have like studied so closely, such a nerd about this guy. And something that he did is he never let anything go. He never let anything go. He would write a song in like 1968 and it wouldn't turn up on an album until 1995. He held on to everything. He didn't judge what he made in that way. He knew that if it came out of here, I trust myself enough that it might be useful. So there is some stuff that in those early drafts of Apocalypse Kinda, I want to say that the first draft of Apocalypse Kinda #1 might have been like 40 pages written as a film script. It had a lot of shit in it. It had a lot of stuff. And maybe like 60% of that stuff got cut out. And I think mostly it was stuff that it was good to let go of. But there are some things that I really loved, I really liked. Either it was a character or an idea that I just thought that really pops. That's really interesting. And it's still at this point is sort of an open question about whether it's going to make it in. You know what I mean? but I just keep that stuff on the back burner, and I tell myself, like, you just have to trust your instinct about whether or not it makes sense to fold this in.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing, like, I don't want to spoil it in case it does end up coming into the story, but there's one character that I just love. I just love this character. I think it's such an interesting character. I think that it would look great. It would be so exciting, but I have no idea if she's going to make it in. I hope that she does. And every time I go to start another issue, I'm always thinking 3 or 4 issues ahead. Is there anything in here that might eventually lead to this? Is there? But who knows? You just have to trust your own instinct that if it's supposed to be in there, it'll be in there. Don't rush it. Try to pay attention to what the needs are of the moment, So that makes it a little bit easier,
Yeah,
Some of
yeah.
that
And
stuff might never make it in, but
yeah. So do you what do you use as your guide to determine what makes it and what doesn't make it? I mean, is it truly just gut, or do you have, all right, this issue, this is the theme, this is the
yeah,
overarching, core, what we want to cut into, and does this
yeah.
character fit into that or not? Is there something like that you use as a guide to determine?
I mean, it's sort of an organic process. I mean, I kind of start out with an understanding with myself. Okay, it's got to be 22 pages. At the very most, it can be 24. So whatever's going to happen, it's got to happen in 22 pages. At the same time, a ladder rung above that, on any given page, you want to maybe keep it to 5 or 6 panels. So that's the economy that you're working with. Sometimes, sure, could be more panels than that. I'm no expert. Who am I to say? There are comics that I like where on sometimes there will be 10 or 12 panels. Go wild. But for me, like, just for myself, I try to think of it as like, let's try to keep it 5, 6 panels. So those are the limitations that you're working with. So starting with that, then, I have my scripting written out, my plans, which is sort of a lot of dialogue. I have all the dialogue written out.
Mm-hmm.
So then I might take a piece of paper and I just do my own little thumbnails, my own little scribbles, and I try to plot out, break each page, what's going to happen on each page, what might be the first panel, what might be the last panel, what is that panel going to lead into. That's really the first step where stuff gets cut. What do you need? Is this flowing? Granted, I'm just looking at my own little scribbles, but you can still get a sense of
Visualize,
what the rhythm might be. You get a good idea of what you need to lose, where it flows, where it doesn't, and especially with a story like this where I guess I would say it's building to a surprise. There's a twist coming. Any story that deals with like obfuscation or things not being quite what they appear to be, that at some point you're going to turn a corner and there are going to be some revelations. When you're doing a story like that, you want to be kind of letting out the rope slowly. You don't want to rush it. But at the same time, I was talking with this guy. I did an interview with this other podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the guy who is the host of it, he's a writer. And after the podcast, I was just talking with him for like half an hour or so after we finished doing the interview. But we were just talking about writing, about storytelling. And he told me, you don't want to, it's good to have a secret, but you don't want to keep your secret too long.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And that was kind of playing on my mind, thinking about it. And I ended up going back and like basically eliminating an entire issue of this thing. You know what I mean? That can happen though. It's great and exciting when that happens. So that for me, the other thing, I want to make sure, like, what do we really want to get to? What do you really want to get to?
Right.
And you probably recognize that in movies. There are some movies where it's just like I'm a big fan of the Planet of the Apes movies, the old Planet of the
Me
Apes
too.
movies,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that movie does a great job of like you have just the right amount of time in that movie, the 68 version, before the monkeys show up. Do you know what I mean? They show
Yeah.
up like right at if they had waited any longer, you'd be checking your watch like when are the monkeys going to show up? Do you know what I mean?
Or like,
Or if
what
they
is
had
going
come
on? Like,
Yeah, like, or if they had shown up any sooner, it might be like, "Whoa, I wasn't ready for the monkeys. I needed a little more time." Do you know what I mean? Like, I think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
important
No,
for
it's
a movie.
I mean,
You
you talked
know?
about it before, snapping your fingers. Like you have to have the right
Yeah,
tempo
you have to have
and
the right
you have
tempo.
to, yeah, I mean, it's like music, right? You want the chorus to come in the right time.
Exactly. You
And
want
even
it to
script
come in at
writing.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, even
it's
script
that
writing
tricky
for film,
thing.
you have there's a narrative arc, and
Absolutely.
90% of all movies follow that arc, and 100%
Yeah.
of big budget movies follow that arc.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a reason why that
Ideally,
arc exists, because people,
yeah.
I don't know if some, I always wonder if have people just come to expect that arc because of the way that films have been made over time and we're conditioned to it,
Sure.
or is it just natural for us? Kind of the chicken or the egg question. Is it just
Yeah.
natural for us with the attention span of humans, that this is the perfect system for storytelling via film?
Yeah.
You play with that with comics as well. And I had
Absolutely.
forgot about the question. It was in my head like 20 minutes ago, I think, but I
Yeah.
wonder if you play with any such arc within each issue. Do you have a specific, um, you know, you want the climax to occur at the right point, or building up to the climax, conflict and resolution? Do you play with any of these storytelling tools while you're trying to develop the tempo of each issue?
That's a good question. I mean, I really think of myself still at this point as a new writer, somebody who is relatively certainly new to writing comics, but new to storytelling in this way in general. I mean, it's new to me. So I'm still learning how it's done. I'm still finding out for myself what works. And when I read comics, the comics that I like, I try to read them with a critical eye. I try to ask myself what works, what doesn't. You know, I feel like for a long time in my life, I've kind of been that way with film just because I love movies. Thinking of film in a critical way, those movies that you love, what is it about them that works? You
Right.
know? But for comics, it's new to me. So I just when I am writing an issue of the comic, you want it to end in a place where you're excited about what's going to happen next, but you're not sure what's going to happen next. That's really the big thing for me is I just want to make sure that it ends in a place where, well, I wonder what's going to happen, but I don't really know that I could forecast what's going to happen.
Mm.
In terms of any other questions, I mean, I'm just learning to trust my instinct about that, and there are things that I notice that seem more successful than others. Like an ongoing interest of mine is how long does a scene really need to last?
Mm.
Any given scene in the comic, issue 1 or issue 2, there are some interactions between characters that happen. When is this? Just sidebar. Do you know when this podcast might come out?
Whenever
Because
you
I'm.
want it to.
Well, it's not really a spoiler, but so the comic is going to come out on the 17th. But anyway, so if you remember in issue 2, there's the scene where Toby's in the car with the dude,
Hmm.
the guy who
Right.
his dad worked with. Yeah, so that scene lasts like 3 pages, all right? There was a version of that scene that was 2 pages, there's a version of that scene that was 4, and kind of contracting and expanding, figuring out how much do you need, how much can you lose. That's of interest to me. And the comics that I like, that I read, that I try to think critically about, sort of noticing like, okay, so how long do things tend to last? Like, how is this most effective dramatically, you know?
Mm.
But I'm still learning for myself. That's kind of been the real pleasure of writing for comics. You know, with the band, I went through this big long period where I was learning on my feet how to write songs, how to collaborate in a band with other musicians. It was all about learning. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Learning how to do it. For comics, it's been the same thing. I've never done this before. I've never collaborated with people in this way. Let's learn how to do it, you know? But the one thing that if I would say, if there's any kind of like guiding posts that I have for writing an issue, is just that simple metric of, does it end somewhere where you're a little bit confused and a little bit excited about what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a good guide, I think, and constantly building some sort of suspense, whether
Yeah.
it's emotional suspense or event based suspense. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I appreciate that you were talking about that, deciding how much time to spend on a specific scene, and also, I thought about it in terms of how you spend that time. Do you have a silent frame to emote
Yeah.
maybe what the character is feeling, that there's no words on the page, but you can see, the reaction of the character
Yeah.
to the event that preceded that pain?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure that with your filmmaking, you've noticed the same thing. I mean, you can write a scene for a movie or for a comic or whatever it is that's all dialogue, talking, 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 talking. And some movies are like that, just talking from beginning to end. Like one of my favorite movies, I love like Clerks, the Kevin Smith movie. I love like, have you ever seen My Dinner with Andre? Do you
No,
know that movie?
no.
Okay, well, that's some movie. This is some movie from the 80s, which is just these two dudes. You would recognize the one guy, an actor named Wallace Shawn, and then a theater director, a guy named Andre Gregory. They wrote and made this movie together that's just, it's scripted, they're acting it, it's not improvised, but just a dinner that they have together where they just talk. It was like a huge, like artsy fartsy movie in the 80s. But anyway, all that to say, there are movies where it's just talking where, wow, this is so exciting. But at the same time, you know, sometimes you don't need that. You
Right.
know, you want to get out of the story's way. And sometimes too much talking, it can slow it down or it can blunt it. So that is an important thing. I mean, when Enrico Orlandi, who's the artist, you know, I send him the script, it's got the panels, it's got the dialogue. What he sends back to me is the art without any of the lettering. Reed, who's the letterer, hasn't lettered it yet, so it's just a naked page. So in that moment, you look at it and you really do see, huh, I guess I don't need anybody to say anything in that panel.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's an
Yeah,
interesting way to see your story, which is based in
it's
words
true.
primarily,
It's true
right?
though. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
cool.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
have you cut a lot
ideally,
of dialogue? Have you cut a lot
oh
of
yeah,
dialogue out based on that? Interesting.
yeah. I mean, I have. I've cut out a lot of dialogue. Dialogue will change. You know, there's a scene in this comic in issue 2 where the dialogue is completely different from what was written. He illustrated, you know, with one script, with everybody saying one, you know, whatever it was that we had them saying. But when I got the page back from him and I looked at it, you know, the dialogue as it had been written, it worked perfectly fine with what he drew. But what he drew without any lettering on it suggested something different to me, you
Mm.
know, and the scene ended up being rewritten around kind of what he had drawn, the expressions, because there's a rhythm and a life to what he does, independent of whatever dialogue I've come up with.
Right,
So
right,
that's
right.
what I like. There is that back and forth. That's been exciting. That's an exciting thing about working on a comic for sure.
Yeah, it's cool to hear kind of the connection for you
Yeah,
between the collaboration of acting, uh,
absolutely.
your band, and this,
Yeah.
and the commonalities between those, the
But did you
similarities between
feel
them.
that? So this movie that you made, like when you were editing it, is there anything that I'm sure there must have been stuff that was completely different on the page
Oh,
or
it's a
even on the
totally
day when
different
you
movie.
it's a
It's
totally
entirely
different
different
movie.
movie. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
wild how
yeah.
that happens. You
It's,
find a completely different, you know,
I
it's all
mean,
raw material.
cut scenes because of, I mean, I started off, I mentioned, with like a whole bunch of words on a page that, sequentially made sense, but there was just way too much going on. And I reached
Yeah.
into it. And from the middle of it, I pulled out an actual condensed story, finished it. And then when we were filming it, guerrilla budget. And I was
Yeah.
also had time limitations that I had to finish filming it within a month or so. So it was really crunch time. So there were, on the fly figuring out which scenes were absolutely critical to have a story.
Yeah.
Um, and then cutting it together and reorganizing scenes, kind of based on what footage I had and the tone that we were able to capture of certain scenes versus others. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, to be honest, a little bit stressful at times,
Oh, I'm
but
sure. I'm
yeah,
I'm
but
positive it has to be. But that's the exciting thing
that,
about it is
right.
until people have paid money and their butts are in the chairs and they're seeing it, until you really reach that point of, okay, well, you can't go back now. It's all raw material. It can
Right.
change moment to moment. I mean, there's stuff on issue 2. We only just a couple of days ago really froze issue 2 where we were like, okay, we're not changing anything else. But I mean, that was kind of the interesting thing is on issue 1, I got from Reed, who's the letterer, he sent me his like second pass on the lettering. Like he did one pass and then I gave him some notes where I was like, can we change this line? Can we maybe change that? And then he sent me a couple of days later the file with his second pass on it. A week later, the thing got released. Now, this time on issue 2, it was like, okay, so let's try to leave a month between that moment when
Buffer.
we think yeah, that moment when you think it's done and that moment when you're actually going to release it. And it's changed so much just in the span of those 30 days. But with the band, it was the same way. We would do a song, we would play it. Okay, this is great. We're ready to go and play it live. We do a show, play it live. Oh man, this song's great. Like 2 weeks later, we meet back to rehearse for our next gig. We completely changed the song. There are some songs that, like, there's one song that we just released a song last month on Spotify, and we had been playing this song live for maybe a year.
What's it called?
And it's called the bassist wrote it. It's a song called God is Dead, and it's sort of like a punk kind of punk pop kind of, it's got hand claps, and he had written this song and we'd been playing it live for like a year. We must have played this song like 5 or 6 different ways. Every time you saw the band, we would play this song, but it would sound completely different. You know what I mean? And it was only when we were like, we should record this song. It was maybe like 2 weeks before we're going to go into the studio. And he came in and he's like, I just don't think it's not working. Completely changed it again. But that's
Wow.
fun. I mean, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it's these things, especially in a collaborative space. I mean, even when you're making it by yourself, they're really living and breathing
Yeah,
and evolving and changing and improving,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So are you writing any other comics? Where do you see your path going
Woo.
from here, within and outside of Apocalypse, kinda?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have just loved so much writing comics that I would love to do more. And there are some other ideas that I have that I'm working on. There's one idea in particular that I'm really excited about, but I'm trying to figure out for myself this time, because Apocalypse Kinda, this was really a passion project. It was really just something that I thought, I'm going to self-publish it. I'm going to put it online. The first issue, it was free. We didn't even ask any money for it. Just go and you can read it. It's really just a labor of love. This new idea that I have, it's something that I think is strong enough and also compact enough. It's not like Apocalypse Kinda where I don't know how it's going to end. It's an idea that the other thing about Apocalypse Kinda is there was no elevator pitch for it. There was no way to like pitch it to somebody in like a sentence or two, you
Right.
know. Yeah, it's just kind of a big messy idea. Who even knows where it's going?
Well,
But
it's a
this other
living, breathing, creative,
It's a living,
collaborative.
breathing
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, who knows? But this other idea is a lot more concise, a lot more compact. So it is something that I'm hoping to pitch to some publishers, some small publishers, and see if we can put it together. But no, I'm always writing stuff. I mean, I just think that that's what life is all about, is about having little ideas, not staking anything on it. You know what I mean? Just having an idea, just seeing where it goes. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
always obsessing over whatever I'm obsessing over. But there is one idea that I think is pretty cool that we'll
Eh,
see.
Is that already pretty much like the bones for it written
Yeah,
or?
I mean it's written, it has been written. Um I mean I'm always rewriting, because I'm sure you know this just from writing scripts for movies. You write something and you think it's the greatest thing in the world, you put it away, and then you come back to it a month later and you look at it and you're like, okay, well, this fucking sucks. Like, what was I thinking?
I love
So
that moment though,
yeah,
because the fun, I mean, I love the blank page and filling out the blank page, but if you've really tweaked something that you put onto that blank page as much as you could in one sitting, and your eyes are watery and you feel like
yeah,
you're going to pass out, but you need to stroke the keys a little bit more to get it all out of you before you fall asleep, and you fall asleep, put it on the shelf, you come back to it a couple of weeks or however many days later, and the then you could get into restructuring and
yeah,
tweaking and kind of perfecting. And
absolutely,
I like realizing what sucks, because usually I have like a decent idea of how to make it better. Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, and I
a lot
think
of
that,
fun in all of those steps of the
and
process.
sometimes, when you look at something that you've done and you've been able to take that step back, once you're able to hate it a little bit, then you sometimes that's the first step towards making it really good.
Right.
But
Yeah.
also sometimes if you're lucky, even if you're looking at it and there's so much about it that you just can't stand, and what was I thinking, and I'm a hack, there will be that one little kernel of something that still resonates with you, that you still think is good. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yep.
And that
Yeah.
can really, like, okay, so that is a good place to be for
Yeah.
sure.
And I guess that's why David Bowie never threw any of those ideas and
He never
concepts.
threw any
And
of those ideas away. But
yeah.
he was really somebody who had, when you talk about like an artistic practice, you know, that was a dude who really thought about the big picture. And he had highs and he had lows. He had periods in his life where he was a critical and commercial darling. And then he had big, long, fallow periods where he was the lamest dude on MTV and nobody was buying his records. But he always went after what interested him
Mm,
and always took ownership of the work that he did. You know what I mean?
yeah. And
Which
I
is
don't know that
important.
much about him other than his music. Is there anything else specifically about him that inspires you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was truly, I always kind of roll my eyes whenever people, I'm sure you've seen this, when people will be like, I'm an interdisciplinary artist. You know, when people call themselves that, I'm an
I
interdisciplinary
haven't got
artist.
that. I haven't gotten that, but
You've never seen that? Okay, I feel like suddenly there was this one period in my life where everybody I knew suddenly became an interdisciplinary artist. That means I act and I write and I this and I that. So I sort of unfairly, I kind of, but he really was. I eat my words a little bit. He truly was a real interdisciplinary artist, and it
mm,
wasn't just in the sense that he dabbled in a lot of different things, which he did. You know, he was a musician, he was a great actor,
actor,
he
yeah.
painted. Yeah, he painted. He was a sculptor. Um, he thought of everything that he did, whether it was music or acting or painting, whatever else he did, he really didn't think of it as separate areas. You
Mm,
know, he thought of it holistically. It was all the same. You know what I mean? And it all came out of, it seems, I mean, I didn't know the guy. I just know from what I've read, from what I've read about his life and interviews with him, it was all rooted in an interest in what was going on around him.
mm,
He was fascinated by the world. He was fascinated by his contemporaries, other artists. You know, people say all the time, oh, he stole from everybody. But he did. He stole from everybody, but in a beautiful way. He took everything in, and he had a way of distilling things to their essential components, and he had a way of seeing connections between things. There's a great writer named Chris O'Leary, who's a music journalist, who wasn't a David Bowie fan, but who a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, just on a whim, he said that he was either going to do it about David Bowie or Pete Townsend from The Who. He started doing essays about every song that David Bowie ever wrote.
mm,
Not because he was a fan, just because he thought seems like an interesting thing to do. Better to pick somebody who I don't really have an emotional attachment to, who's had a big long career. So he just chose David
right.
Bowie. But
Interesting.
he ended up writing essays about every song that David Bowie ever wrote, really going in depth about where the songs came from, you know, what the inspiration was. And it's wild to see how he was able to take all these disparate interests and influences and put them together, you know, and out of that make something so new and unexpected. And that's a long-winded way. I really sound like a fanboy, like a mewling
No,
nerd,
I love it.
but
That's really interesting.
that for me is just so inspiring to me, and it's something that I try to give myself permission to do. To if there's something that you're interested in, really let yourself get obsessed about it. Really let yourself chew on it and think about all of the implications, you know? Like we were talking about earlier about going down a rabbit hole on YouTube. Go down those rabbit holes. Waste hours on Wikipedia, you know? Anything that might be of interest to you, go after it and really try to wring as much out of it as you can. Because if you really give yourself permission to go wild and get obsessed about stuff, there's no telling the connections that you'll be able to make. And really, Apocalypse kinda especially grew out of that kind of permission of just really letting yourself just soak in all the stuff that is confusing you and inspiring you. There's no telling like what you're going to be able to come up with if you just let yourself savor that stuff. And that's really what he did.
I love what you just said. I,
Oh, well,
I,
yeah.
I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I almost want to just end it right now because I think that is inspiring, not just
Mm,
your, what you shared with about David Bowie, but how you use that to empower yourself. I think,
yeah.
and the message that, and the lessons you've learned from learning about his life. Thank you for sharing that. I think, yeah, I don't know what else to say. I kind of want to end on that note. If you don't have anything else to share
I
with
don't
us, because that
know.
was
I would just tell your listeners that the comic is going to come out on February 17th.
and where can
So
they find it?
if you go to the website apocalypsekinda.com, um, you can read the first issue for free, and then number 2 is going to be available on the website through Gumroad, which is like a self-publishing website, and you can
Awesome.
buy it starting on the 17th. And then I would also, just because they're so great, and we didn't really talk about them too much, but I would just urge your listeners to check out Enrico Orlandi, who's the guy who drew it. He's got his own book that came out through Dark Horse called The Flower of the Witch, which is a fantasy story that he wrote and he drew. Um, the dude who lettered it is this guy, Reed Hinckley Barnes. If you're listening to this and you work in comics, what a fantastic letterer he is. Such a great guy to work with. A writer himself, writes his own stuff. And then the cover for issue 1 and 2. I just love to plug these guys because I love
No,
them so much.
please. I mean, if you remember offhand, if
Sorry
you
to
give
be a
me their.
shill.
No, you're not at all. Because this is the nature of true collaboration is,
Yeah, they're just great. But the cover for one
sharing
and
information
two,
about your collaborators. If you remember
yeah.
their Twitter or Instagram handles, say
Yeah,
them
I
too.
don't think Enrico's not really on Twitter, I don't think. He's on Instagram, but
Instagram.
I would need to go back and look. Reed is on Twitter. He's just Reed_HB. His last name is Hinkley Barnes. He's a lot of fun. He complains on Twitter in a fun way. He's one of those guys. And then the cover for issues 1 and 2 is by a guy named Val Halverson, who did, if anybody reading this likes comics, a comic with a guy named Justin Richards called Finger Guns, which is about 2 young kids who are able to affect other people's emotions by doing finger guns. Like if you
That's an awesome
go
concept.
like that, you can make somebody angry or you can make somebody happy. And Val drew that, and Val's just a fantastic artist. So those are 3 people that I would encourage your listeners to go and check out because they're all wonderful.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
we collectively, my listeners, and certainly I myself am excited for all of the many issues to come. And let us know if you do reach out to a publisher with your new story, because we're
Absolutely.
excited
Knock on
for,
wood.
yeah, Apocalypse Kinda and whatever else you have in store for us in the future. So keep writing, keep improving, keep collaborating, and going through the process
Oh
to
yeah.
pursue your random.
That's what you got to do, man. That's what life is all about.
I love it. All right, Luke. Well, thank you again for joining me. And until next time, enjoy your random.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hey, guys, gals, and fellow randoms. That's what we all are here. Thanks for hanging on for the post-show debriefing. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Luke Wehner, and I definitely did. And I took something from it. I was kind of speechless at the end there when he was talking about his inspiration from David Bowie and kind of his philosophy of just allowing yourself to explore, allowing yourself to go down various rabbit holes and different trails of thought that may end up in a dead end or may end up in some really ludicrous and ridiculous concept that you develop. But if you don't allow yourself to weed through those ridiculous concepts, you may miss a diamond in kind of a rough, or even a possibility of turning one of these ridiculous concepts into ironing it out and making it into something that is actually feasible. So, talking in loose abstractions now, but allow yourself the time to have an idea and really get down into the nitty-gritty of it, because it's that exploration and within those little nuggets of an idea that you could dig really deep into something that doesn't seem to have so much depth, to find original concepts and things that have not yet been explored, right? Turn over the rock that nobody else has turned. You have a concept and it seems so ludicrous, but dig in a little bit more deeply than other people might, because there might be something to find there. That is my rephrasing and interpretation of what Luke shared with us at the end of the episode. And I wasn't just acting. I was actually kind of speechless. I didn't know what to say because his words were so inspiring, as is his comic Apocalypse Kinda. And you could check out the second issue, not episode, issue, which dropped pretty recently. And I like the fact that we explored on the podcast that he has a general idea of where it's going to go, but he's letting this piece in particular flow. He has a couple of other works that he's working on, a couple of other concepts he's fleshing out that will be a little bit more structured. But for Apocalypse Kinda, he has ideas and he's letting it go the directions that it might. I think that's really cool to make those decisions at the start of a creative process. If you have a project, to say, these are the boundaries, right? This is what I'm going to allow myself to do. This is the process I'm going to follow. For Apocalypse Kinda, I'm going to leave it flexible, leave it a little bit more open, and make decisions as each issue is released. And I think that's really cool. And it's important to make those decisions up front and also just to make them, right? I oftentimes struggle with kind of ambiguity, and I have a lot of ideas, but I didn't really flesh out and make the final decision on going one direction or the other. The more decisions you make up front, the smoother the process is going to be, the more focused you can be on the project itself. So that is a lesson I learned from this podcast. I wonder if you guys learned a lesson and what it might have been. Maybe something slipped by me. Maybe I missed something. If there's something that you pulled out of this conversation that you enjoyed, please holler at us at What's Your Random on Instagram and or Twitter, because we'd love to hear some feedback and learn if our listeners are benefiting in the same way that I am. So please do share. And as far as improving the podcast, things are going pretty smoothly now. I have a constant flow of guests. I have a constant workflow. And again, limiting my kind of goal to just 3 episodes per a month has lightened the load and made things much more flexible. And, I work a day job. I have other things going on in life, and I didn't want the podcast to be something that was a stressor. I love these conversations, and I don't want to feel overwhelmed by having too much to work on at once. And 3 episodes a month is a pretty nice balance, I gotta say. So I'm enjoying it so far in this, our first full season of What's Your Random. That is all from me. And as always, I say to you, enjoy the random.